My name is Alfonso. I am a native of the Dominican Republic, and I enlisted in the army at the age of 18. The story I am going to tell may seem unbelievable, but for me, it was real. It all began in a remote place called Los Haitises, a virgin and little explored national park in the Dominican Republic. My team was composed of Rodriguez, Alejandro, Alex, Luis, and Raul, all with extensive military experience. During a jungle exploration mission, night fell, and we decided to camp. We needed water, so I volunteered to go to the nearby river on horseback since the terrain conditions did not allow for other means of transportation. Upon reaching the river and filling the water buckets, I heard a strange noise. I felt as if something had fallen from a nearby palm tree, and I became alert, thinking it could be an infiltrating enemy. When I was about to mount the horse to return to the camp, the animal would not move. At that moment, I remembered that it is said that horses perceive negative energy and stay still when there is danger. The noise came again, and I panicked. I looked around and saw a large, dark figure standing about 5 meters away from me. When I turned back to the horse, I noticed a wound on its neck as if a claw had slashed it. Filled with panic, I ran back to the camp. Along the way, I felt as if something invisible was grabbing my legs and temples. At one point, one of these forces twisted my ankle, making the journey even more difficult. I crawled to the camp and my companions came out to help me. I told them what had happened, and although they initially doubted my story, Raul and I decided to return to the site to investigate. Upon arriving, we found the horse seemingly unharmed. My companions started joking, suggesting that I was imagining things since there were only overturned buckets on the ground. Days passed without incident until one night when I went to check on the horse, I noticed that its eyes were dark and deep with a strange reddish tone. The horse was restless, and when I brought my companions to show them, we found the horse dead, with the neck wound that had previously disappeared. The tension in the camp increased, but we continued with our mission. One night, while on guard duty, we heard footsteps around the camp. We prepared for a possible attack, but we saw no one. The footsteps stopped suddenly, and we heard a terrifying whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Rodriguez suggested that we retreat and return to the barracks, but Alejandro insisted that we should complete the mission. We decided to stay alert and continue. That same night, a blood-curdling scream woke us all. We came out of the tents and found Alex on the ground, trembling and pointing towards the jungle. In the darkness, we glimpsed a tall, thin figure with bright red eyes watching us. We fired at the figure, but it vanished into the darkness. Alex could not speak about what he saw, but his eyes reflected deep terror. We decided to abandon the camp at dawn. We gathered our things and started the return journey, but the atmosphere was oppressive, as if something or someone was following us. We walked in silence, feeling a constant presence around us. Upon reaching a clearing, we encountered a disturbing scene. There were ancient symbols carved into the trees and remnants of what seemed to be ancient rituals. Rodriguez, who had knowledge of indigenous cultures, recognized the symbols as warning and protection marks. We realized that we had invaded a sacred place, and perhaps the figure we had seen was the guardian of that site. We quickened our pace, but we felt that the figure was following us. Suddenly, Alejandro fell to the ground, screaming that something invisible was attacking him. We tried to help him, but it seemed that an invisible force kept him trapped. Finally, we managed to free him and continued running until we reached a clearer area. The feeling of danger diminished, but never completely disappeared. Upon returning to the barracks, we reported what had happened, but our superiors took it with skepticism. Since that day, everyone in the team changed. Alejandro left the army, unable to overcome the trauma. Alex rarely spoke and avoided the jungle at all costs. Raul and I continued our military lives, but always with a sense of unease. We never returned to Los Haitises. What we experienced there remained etched in our minds, a reminder that there are places and forces in this world that we do not understand and that are better left alone. We had arrived at the camp at the beginning of May. The humidity and heat were suffocating, and the jungle seemed to be alive, breathing around us. We were a small group, 8 well-trained soldiers, but nothing prepared us for what we would find. The first night, while setting up the tents and establishing a secure perimeter, Javier, our scout, came running back from the forest. His face was pale and his eyes reflected a fear rarely seen in him. "You have to see this," he said, barely able to control his breathing. He led us through the underbrush to a clearing. What we saw there left us speechless. Dozens of rag dolls hung from the tree branches. They were rudimentary, made from scraps of cloth and stuffed with what seemed to be straw. Some were in better condition than others, but all had an eerie air about them. "Who could do something like this?" asked Sanchez, our gunner, breaking the silence. No one had an answer. The jungle seemed to keep its secrets, watching us in silence. We decided to leave the dolls where they were and return to the camp. That night, the usual jungle noises seemed more intense, as if they were watching us. The next morning, one of the dolls had appeared at the edge of our camp. I recognized it immediately. It was the same doll I had seen the night before. Only now it was closer, as if it had covered the distance by itself. "This doesn't make sense," murmured Martinez, our medic. "Who would do something like this?" The question remained unanswered. We decided to reinforce the night watches and stay alert. But every night, more dolls appeared, always getting a little closer. Then, one night, Ramos, one of our comrades, disappeared. We had finished a routine patrol and were about to rest when we noticed his absence. We searched everywhere, but there was no trace of him. The next day, one of the dolls had his face. It was grotesque and terrifying, as if someone had captured the essence of Ramos in that rag object. "This can't be real," said Gomez, our commander. "We're being watched. I don't know who or what, but this isn't natural." The tension grew with each passing night. The dolls continued to appear, and the jungle became more oppressive. We began to notice shadows moving between the trees, whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. One night, while on guard duty, I heard a strange noise. At first, I thought it was an animal, but then I distinguished a whisper, as if someone were murmuring my name. I turned slowly and saw a figure in the darkness. It was tall and thin, almost humanoid, but its eyes glowed with an unnatural light. "Who's there?" I shouted, pointing my weapon at the figure. There was no answer. The figure vanished into the darkness, leaving me with a cold that penetrated to my bones. I woke the others, but we found nothing. Only the dolls, which now seemed more numerous and closer than ever. Fear took hold of us. We decided we had to abandon the camp, but the jungle did not want to let us go. Every attempt to escape was thwarted by paths that closed up as if the trees and vegetation were alive and against us. One day, while trying to find a way out, we stumbled upon an abandoned cabin. Inside, we found old writings and drawings showing ancient rituals, sacrifices, and rag dolls. It was as if someone had been practicing dark magic in that place for years. "This is witchcraft," said Perez, our communications specialist. "We are trapped in some kind of curse." There was no way to escape that reality. Every night, the dolls kept appearing, always closer, always more threatening. Some of my comrades began to lose their sanity, speaking in whispers and seeing things that weren't there. One night, while a storm battered our camp, I heard a blood-curdling scream. I ran to the source of the sound and found Gomez, our commander, trapped on the ground, surrounded by dolls. I tried to help him, but something invisible held me back, a force that pushed me away. "Help me!" Gomez screamed, but his words were drowned out by the roar of the storm. The next day, Gomez had disappeared, and in his place was another doll with his pale face and empty eyes. We were no longer a team. We were a group of terrified and desperate men. We decided to burn the dolls, hoping that would break the curse. We gathered all we could find and threw them into the fire. The jungle seemed to roar in protest. The fire illuminated our faces, revealing the fear and despair in our eyes. But when the flames died down, the dolls were still there, intact. That night, I couldn't sleep. The whispers were louder, and the dolls seemed to move in the darkness. I felt a presence behind me, and when I turned, I saw the figure with glowing eyes. This time, it was closer, and I could see its face, an amalgam of all the faces of my missing comrades. "What do you want from us?" I shouted, but there was no answer. I woke the rest, but the figure had disappeared. I didn't know if I was losing my sanity or if I had really seen what I believed I had seen. We decided to make one last attempt to escape at dawn. We moved quickly, avoiding looking back. The jungle seemed to resist, but we managed to make our way out. Finally, after what seemed like endless hours, we found a path that led us out of the jungle. We were not the same men who had entered. We were shadows of what we once were, marked by an experience we could never forget. We never knew what really was in that jungle. The official reports mentioned disappearances and extreme conditions, but no one spoke of the dolls, the whispers, or the figure with glowing eyes. It was as if the entire experience had been a bad dream, but the scars were real, and the fear never disappeared. Since then, every time I close my eyes, I see those dolls and remember my lost comrades. The jungle may be behind, but its horrors will follow me forever. It was our third day of patrol in the area, searching for a group of guerrillas said to be operating in the region. So far, we had found no trace of them, just the oppressive silence of the jungle and the singing of insects. Suddenly, a chill ran down my spine. It wasn't the heat, it was something else, a premonition, a feeling that something wasn't right. I looked at my comrades, Sergeant Rodriguez and Corporal Sanchez, but they didn't seem to have noticed anything. "Hey, have you felt anything?" I whispered to Rodriguez. He shook his head. "No, what's up?" "I don't know, it's like a bad feeling. I feel like something is going to happen." Rodriguez laughed. "You're paranoid, Ramirez. It's just the heat. Have some water." I took out my canteen and drank a sip of warm water. It didn't take away the feeling of unease, but I didn't want to worry my comrades. We continued walking in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream broke the silence of the jungle, a scream of pain, of terror. We stopped immediately, our hearts pounding in our chests. "What was that?" whispered Sanchez. "I don't know," responded Rodriguez with a tense voice. "Let's check it out." We drew our weapons and advanced cautiously in the direction of the scream. The vegetation was getting denser, and the sunlight barely penetrated through the leaves. We stumbled over roots and vines, and the air became increasingly suffocating. Suddenly, we arrived at a clearing. In the center of the clearing lay the body of one of our men. He was lying on the ground, his face pale, and his eyes wide open. He had a deep wound in his chest from which blood gushed out. Another scream echoed in the jungle, this time closer. Rodriguez and Sanchez ran towards the sound, and I followed closely. We found the other soldier a few meters away. He was also dead, with a similar wound in his chest. Fear took hold of me. What was happening? Who had killed our comrades? We saw no one. We heard no sound. Only the oppressive silence of the jungle. Suddenly, a thick red mist began to rise from the ground, enveloping us completely. We couldn't see anything, just the intense red of the mist. The screams continued, getting closer and more desperate. I ran blindly, stumbling over roots and vines. I tried to escape the mist, the screams, the terror that consumed me. I don't know how long I ran, but finally, I fell to the ground, exhausted and terrified. When the mist dissipated, I found myself alone. My comrades had disappeared without a trace. Only the bloodstains on the ground remained, a macabre reminder of what had happened. I stood up, trembling and disoriented. I didn't know what to do, where to go. The jungle surrounded me, a green and hostile labyrinth. I felt like a cornered prey, waiting to be the next victim. I walked aimlessly, not knowing what to do. Fear consumed me, desperation took over. I just wanted to get out of that green hell, go home to my family. Suddenly, I saw a light in the distance, a dim, flickering light. I was filled with hope and ran towards it. The light got closer, and as I approached, I could distinguish the shape of a wooden cabin. I reached the cabin and knocked on the door. There was no response. I knocked again, this time more forcefully. The door slowly opened, and an old woman looked at me with kind eyes. "Come in, my child," she said in a soft voice. "You will be safe here." I entered the cabin, and the old woman closed the door behind me. I sat in a wooden chair, and she gave me a glass of fresh water. I drank slowly, savoring every drop. The old woman watched me in silence, with a compassionate expression on her face. "Tell me what happened to you, my child," she finally said. I told her everything that had happened, from the moment the red mist enveloped the jungle to the disappearance of my comrades. The old woman listened attentively, without interrupting me once. When I finished speaking, she remained silent for a long time. Then she looked at me with a sad expression. "What you have seen is an ancient curse," she said. "A curse that has haunted this jungle for centuries. It is said to feed on fear and despair, taking the unwary to a terrible fate." I was speechless. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A curse? A terrible fate? "What can I do?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You must be strong," the old woman replied. "You must overcome your fear and face the curse. Only then can you save yourself and return home." I didn't know how to do it, but I was determined to try. I couldn't allow the curse to take me as well. The old woman gave me a protection amulet and told me to follow the light of the moon. Then she bid me farewell with a hug and wished me luck. I left the cabin and ventured into the night. The moon shone brightly in the sky, illuminating the path through the jungle. I walked for hours, following the light of the moon and the old woman's words. Suddenly, I saw a red light in the distance. The light got closer, and as I approached, I could distinguish the shape of a human figure. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure turned around and looked at me with eyes as red as blood. It was one of my comrades, but he was not the same. His face was distorted by fear and anger, and his hands were covered in blood. "Join us!" he screamed. "Become one of us!" I lunged at him with the old woman's amulet in hand. The struggle was fierce, but I finally managed to defeat him. His body crumbled to the ground, leaving only a cloud of red mist. I stood, breathing heavily. I had survived, but I wasn't sure what the future held. The curse was still there, lurking in the jungle. I knew I couldn't stay forever. I had to return home to my family. But I didn't know how to do it. Suddenly, the light of the moon intensified, and a portal opened before me. It was my chance to escape. I ran towards the portal and went through it. In an instant, I found myself back home in my room. I lay down on my bed and closed my eyes. I couldn't believe it had all been real. Had it been just a nightmare? I didn't know. But one thing was certain. I would never forget the experience in the jungle. The red curse had marked me forever. The next day, I woke up with a sense of peace and tranquility. The nightmare had passed, and I was alive. I got out of bed and went to the window. I looked up at the blue sky and took a deep breath. I was alive, and I was home, and that was all that mattered. From the start, the army had taught me to face my fears and stay calm under pressure. However, nothing had prepared me for what I experienced that night. Sometimes I wonder if it was all a product of my exhausted mind, but the clarity of the details makes me doubt. This is the story of my encounter with the inexplicable during a night patrol in a remote forest in Eastern Europe. It was 2 a.m, and the air was thick with a fog that barely allowed us to see a few meters ahead. The moon, hidden behind dense clouds, left the landscape in an eerie twilight. My team, composed of 5 soldiers, had been sent to investigate suspicious movements reported by our local allies. We advanced cautiously, communicating in whispers and hand signals. "Sergeant, did you hear that?" whispered Corporal Martinez, stopping abruptly. I signaled for the team to halt and sharpened my ears. At first, I only heard the crunching of leaves under our feet and the soft murmur of the wind among the trees. But then a strange sound filtered through the fog, a sort of whispering chant, like an ancient melody. "Yes, I hear it," I replied. "Keep your eyes open and advance with caution." We headed towards the source of the sound, our steps resonating softly in the forest's tranquility. The closer we got, the clearer the melody became. It was hypnotic, but also chilling, as if the voices came from another world. Finally, we arrived at a clearing in the forest, and we saw it. A man dressed in an old military uniform stood in the center of the clearing. His clothes seemed straight out of World War I, a long coat, high boots, and a steel helmet. But the most disturbing thing was his face. A completely smooth, white surface, without features, as if someone had erased his features. "Who are you?" I shouted, trying to sound authoritative but with my voice trembling slightly. The man did not respond. He simply stood there motionless, staring at us with that eyeless face. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Sergeant, this isn't normal," said Soldier Rivera, taking a step back. "This guy isn't from here." "Stay calm," I ordered, though I struggled to maintain composure myself. "We'll approach cautiously." I took a step forward and suddenly the man disappeared. There was no flash, no sound. He simply vanished into the air as if he had never been there. We stood frozen, stunned, unable to process what we had just witnessed. "What the hell was that?" exclaimed Corporal Martinez, breaking the silence. "I don't know, but we must move forward," I responded, trying to sound firm. "We have a mission to complete." We continued our patrol, but the atmosphere had become even tenser. Every shadow seemed to move, and the whisper of the wind turned into whispering voices in our minds. Finally, after what felt like hours, we reached our objective, an abandoned cabin. The cabin was in ruins, but had clearly been used recently. We found traces of food and modern military equipment. However, the most unsettling thing was a series of black and white photos pasted on a wall. In all of them, the man without a face appeared, always in the same forest clearing, always in the same uniform. "This doesn't make sense," said Rivera, shining his flashlight over the photos. "How can he be in all these photos?" "We need to get out of here," said Martinez, his voice full of urgency. "This is a trap." Before I could respond, a blood-curdling scream echoed in the air, coming from the forest. We looked at each other, fear reflected in our eyes. "Retreat," I ordered. "We're heading back to the base now." We left the cabin and started running back the way we had come. But the fog seemed thicker, and the forest more confusing. The trees closed around us, and the clearing, where we had seen the man without a face, seemed impossible to find. "Over here," shouted Rivera, pointing to a path we hadn't seen before. We followed it, hoping to find a way out. However, at the end of the path, we found ourselves back in the same clearing. The man without a face was there, motionless, watching us without eyes. "This is impossible," I whispered, feeling panic take over. Suddenly, the man began to move. He approached us slowly, his presence emanating a palpable sense of evil. We backed away, but the clearing seemed to close around us. The air turned icy, and the whisper of the ancient melody filled the space. "No!" shouted Martinez, raising his weapon. "Don't come any closer!" He fired, but the bullets passed through the man without causing harm. He seemed intangible, like a shadow. Finally, total darkness surrounded us, and the last thing I remember is the intense cold and the sound of the melody. I woke up in the military hospital along with the rest of my team. They had found us unconscious on the edge of the forest. No one could explain what had happened to us, and the photos we had found in the cabin had disappeared. Since then, I've tried to forget that night, but the images and sounds still haunt me. Sometimes, in the darkness of the night, I think I hear that ancient melody and wonder if the man without a face is still there, waiting in the forest clearing, ready to lure more unsuspecting souls into his realm of shadows. My platoon advanced cautiously, machetes in hand, cutting through the dense vegetation. We were a group of young soldiers, fresh out of the academy, sent on a reconnaissance mission in a remote border area. The order was simple: look for any signs of enemy activity. We had been walking for days, finding nothing but wild animals and ancient ruins. The group's morale began to drop. Fatigue and monotony took hold of us. Suddenly, one of the soldiers, young Martinez, stumbled upon something. He bent down to pick it up, and among the rotten leaves, he pulled out a small silver relic. It was a handcrafted piece adorned with strange symbols I had never seen before. Martinez, fascinated by the find, showed it to the rest of the platoon. We all examined it with curiosity, not knowing that this small object would bring a curse that would change our lives forever. We managed to complete the mission without incident, but Martinez kept the silver relic. Despite warnings from some, he refused to get rid of it. He said it brought him luck. Upon returning home, things began to change. Martinez, who had once been a cheerful and joking young man, became withdrawn and silent. He spent hours staring at the relic, murmuring words under his breath. One night we found him in his room, pale as a ghost, clutching the relic in his hand. His eyes were filled with terror. "I've seen it!" he screamed. "It's here! It won't leave me alone!" We didn't know what he was referring to, but his terror was palpable. The next day, Martinez disappeared without a trace. We searched everywhere but found not a single clue. The deaths began a year later. The first was Sergeant Rodriguez, found in his trench with his throat slit from ear to ear. The autopsy revealed no trace of the killer, only a strange spiral mark on his chest. Then it was Corporal Gomez, found hanged in the bathroom with the same spiral mark on his forehead. Panic gripped the platoon. We all knew that the curse of the relic was after us. I was the only one who still had it after I found it among Martinez's belongings. I kept it hidden in my backpack, hoping the curse wouldn't reach me. But it didn't work. One night, while I was sleeping, I woke up to a cold presence in the room. I saw a dark shadow next to my bed, with eyes glowing like embers. In an instant, the shadow attacked me. I fought with all my might, but it was too powerful. It took the relic from me and vanished into the night. The next day, I woke up with the spiral mark on my chest. I knew it was my turn. I had no time to lose. I had to find a way to break the curse before it killed me. I deserted the army and embarked on a desperate quest for answers. I traveled to remote places, consulted shamans and paranormal experts. Finally, in a remote village in the mountains, I found an old shaman who revealed the truth about the relic. It was a cursed object created by an indigenous tribe centuries ago to contain the spirit of a bloodthirsty warrior. The spirit could only be released if someone opened the relic, and could only be calmed by returning it to its place of origin, a sacred cave deep in the jungle. I returned to the jungle, following the shaman's instructions. The journey was long and dangerous, filled with traps and enemies. But I was determined to stop the curse, even if it meant my own death. Finally, I reached the cave. Inside, I found a stone altar where I was supposed to place the relic. As I did, the spirit of the warrior was released, filling the cave with a dark and terrifying energy. The spirit attacked me with fury, seeking revenge for its long imprisonment. I fought it with all my might, using the combat techniques I had learned in the army and the shaman's teachings. The battle was fierce, the spirit was powerful, but I was driven by desperation and the desire to end the curse. Finally, I managed to land a fatal blow, banishing it from this world forever. Exhausted and wounded, I left the cave and returned to civilization. The curse was broken, and I could finally live in peace. Despite having defeated the warrior's spirit, the scars of the experience marked me forever. I lost my friends, my military career, and a part of my innocence. However, I also gained something: the wisdom of having faced the darkness and the strength to keep going. I decided to dedicate my life to helping others who, like me, had been victims of the paranormal. I have traveled the world investigating cases of paranormal activity and helping those who have been tormented by evil spirits. It hasn't been easy, but I am passionate about what I do. I know that darkness will always be present in the world, but I also know that there are people like me willing to face it and protect the innocent. The bloody relic remains a mystery to me. I don't know who created it or why it was abandoned in the jungle. But one thing is certain: I will never forget it. It is a constant reminder of the battle I fought and the lesson I learned. Darkness can be defeated, but it always leaves a mark. I have shared my story with you because I believe it is important for the world to know that darkness exists. We must not fear it, but we must be prepared to face it. If you ever encounter something paranormal, don't hesitate to seek help. There are people like me who can help you face your fears and protect you from the darkness. Remember, light always triumphs over darkness.